Hello. Our story begins on Ryloth after a battle ensued in the space over the planet. Anakin and Ahsoka were assisting on a 3-part ground campaign on the surface. Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mace Windu split up their forces in the north, Obi-Wan taking over a captured village, while Mace Windu and his forces moved to besiege the capital city. The village was very important due to their anti-aircraft weaponry. The heavy cannons on the surface were damaging the support vessels that the Republic was using to transport the troops and heavy tanks to the surface. Obi-Wan was able to win his battle, as Mace Windu moved to secure the next sector of the planet, which was the capital. As Mace was doing that, both Obi-Wan and Anakin were clearing up different sectors of the battlefront. They were separated, but Ahsoka and Anakin were still trying to get to understand each other. Not long before the Battle of Ryloth, Ahsoka and Anakin had a moment on Christophsis. It was met with optimism for their future together. Despite Anakin not wanting a student and being rather upset about either Obi-Wan or Yoda forcing Ahsoka onto him, he still felt the desire to be the best teacher he could be for her. As a Jedi, it was his responsibility to not let her down or lead her astray, and he would accept such an important role for another individual. They had been through a fight with the Malevolence. They saved R2 despite dealing with a spy in their ranks. Ahsoka went toe-to-toe with both Grievous and Ventress, as well as almost losing her instructor on Meriden in protection of the local population, and then dealing with the Blue Shadow virus on Naboo. They had a very tense early dynamic, and despite their work together through the early stages of the Clone Wars, their bond hadn't yet formed. Ahsoka was eager for it to be fulfilled, but there was still something separating her from him. She didn't really understand it, and he didn't either. Despite how much they worked together, they just couldn't get it to click. Anakin worried for her on Tatooine when they saved Jabba's son, and she knew that, but the bond as Master and Apprentice never came to fruition. The bond was so integral to building the relationship between Jedi, individuals who typically didn't have emotions. Ahsoka was a full-time student inside the Order as it was, so she was already excited about the bond to be formed with her instructor, but when it didn't come instantaneously, she started to worry. Anakin always figured that forming this bond would come through their combat experiences, but that never came. Instead, during each of those preceding events, tension began to build between the two of them. During the fight with the Malevolence, she saw her massacre risk the lives of their troops during a trench run that was abandoned. Plo redirected Anakin to attack the EMP laser instead, which ended up assisting them with winning the battle. She couldn't really blame Anakin, but in a way she did. When it came to fighting with the two Separatist warriors, she was alone. She fought Grievous to save Rex, and she fought Asajj to stop the escaped Nuke Gunray. When it came to their interaction on Meriden, Ahsoka felt terrible about Anakin's sacrifice, but when it came to the mission on the planet itself, she felt closer to Ayla Secura than she did Anakin. Probably because Ayla was the only Jedi awake, so she felt closer to her. Outside of that, the Blue Shadow virus was an absolute mess, and Ahsoka loathed the entire situation. When it came time to Ryloth, Ahsoka understood the stress of command for the first time, and nearly got Anakin and Yularen killed by not defending the fleet when she should have. Now the two of them were on the ground, assisting the Twi'leks in the liberation of their home world, and she felt nothing but pain. She thought she would feel some sort of relief here. After Naboo, she was able to feel a bit better, but the entire situation and her intoxication due to the drug made her forget most of the experience altogether. Now on Ryloth, she was sitting next to an injured clone trooper. He was as close as one could get to the brink of death, and the weight of command was killing her. She didn't cause the detonation to happen to him, but her leadership put this soldier into this condition. She felt so terrible, and she only wished to comfort him, which she was seemingly able to do. In this moment, Ahsoka saw from the corner of her eye her master. He was talking with rebel leaders and Captain Rex. She felt nothing but shame for herself. She, as a Jedi, was never meant to be a warrior, never meant to be on the front lines, and the divide between Master and Apprentice felt more apparent than ever before in this moment. Anakin could feel Ahsoka's emotions, and so he came over to her. The discussion started out with a soft tone, but it started to build. Anakin seemingly had no issue with the loss of life, but as a Jedi General, he had to have a tough barrier. He couldn't struggle with each individual clone life lost. Not that he didn't want to, but he literally couldn't. He was a leader. He needed to be present, but it turns out forcing that type of mindset onto a 14-year-old girl isn't as easy as it sounds, especially being that unlike Anakin, Ahsoka spent most of her life training to become a Jedi, not a warrior. Anakin tried to ease her out of this. The lack of bond forced hiccups like this to be much more present in their dynamic, but Anakin wasn't going to give up on them. He joked with her in a way, and she found it hard to find humor in all this chaos. Anakin really did try to put himself into her shoes. but there was no connection for the two of them. They weren't seeing eye to eye. She didn't want to serve anymore. She didn't want to be a commander. She didn't want to lead her men to their deaths in a war that made no sense. Ahsoka stopped, looking back to Anakin and considering that she might sound out of place with such commentary, but she was right in her own heart. The war didn't make much sense, not even to Anakin, and yet she was fighting in it. They were all fighting in it. The clones were leaving Kamino and watching their brothers get slaughtered by cheap metal every day. It was a never-ending cycle of pain and misery. Ahsoka, after stumbling over her words, looked to her teacher with tears watering in her eyes, telling him that she didn't want to be a Padawan anymore. The jolt of these words were unexpected to Skywalker. He certainly could understand why she was upset, but he wasn't expecting her to go that far. Maybe he wasn't able to live up to the standard of a Jedi Master. The entire interaction created a tension between them. Anakin was trying to be a good teacher, and it clearly wasn't panning out like that. Skywalker remembered Obi-Wan telling him that once upon a time, he and Qui-Gon almost didn't work out, but they were able to eventually bond. The same thing happened with Anakin and Obi-Wan. What was happening between Ahsoka and Anakin wasn't that they were incompatible, it was that they just weren't bonding with each other. There was a certain level of disconnect, and neither side of it wanted that outcome. Both Anakin and Ahsoka were dedicated to creating a long-lasting bond, but it wasn't happening. Anakin asked her if she really meant what she said, but before the answer could be given, another droid assault would push their conversation to the side, pushing it back down and letting resentment build. Ahsoka was then thrusted back into the war. There would be no turning back now. Ahsoka and Anakin fought for several hours on end, and then were eventually pushed into their fighters to help Mace Windu liberate the capital city. Victory would fall over Ryloth, and the Republic would take the planet away from the Separatists, but there wasn't any true victory, at least not between General and Commander. The tension was obvious, and both Jedi tried to make sure it didn't affect the clones during battle, because despite how good of a general Anakin was, the clones bonded with Ahsoka. When they returned to the Resolute, Anakin and Ahsoka would pick up right where they left off. The rise of fury and disappointment and anger that happened on Ryloth had dissipated, but the feelings Ahsoka had regarding the continuation of her training under Skywalker was not changed. She felt the same, and it wasn't due to Anakin being a bad teacher. That was something she already decided in her own mind wasn't the issue, and she wanted to be sure Anakin knew that he wasn't that problem. However, he was much more willing to embrace a war that she couldn't comprehend, let alone stand for. Painting an entire half of the galaxy as the bad guys wasn't a life she wanted to live. As a Jedi, it felt wrong, and it felt like their order had failed a mandate to not just the Republic, but the galaxy. As Anakin and Ahsoka picked up right where they left off at, Anakin tried to convey that he was apologetic for raising his voice at her if he did, which he didn't, and apologized for the humor he showed on the battlefield, which was misplaced. Ahsoka accepted such apologies, but she made it clear where her decision was. At this point, Anakin knew he would have to embrace Qui-Gon as best as he could, and try and make this thing work, but it was too late. Anakin expressed to her that he would like to try and be the best teacher he could be for her. He didn't want to give up on her and being her instructor. He may have not wanted this when it first started, but he fully embraced her at this moment. Ahsoka was grateful for the dedication to her training, but as the two of them walked across the hallways together, she asked that she could be allowed to return to Coruscant alone. He asked why she was willing to leave, and she expressed that through their hardships together, she realized, or maybe she understood, that their perception of the Jedi way was different. She didn't want to fight. And while that didn't mean she was willing to abandon her troopers, as a 14-year-old she no longer wanted to partake in this war. She didn't want to be the last sentient a person saw before they became one with the Force. It was another reason for the divide between them. It wasn't that Anakin didn't care, because he cared deeply, but the relationship he had with the soldiers was different than Ahsoka's. He wasn't there with them when they died. She was. And the amount of torment that put into her mind was overbearing to say the least. She hated the idea of continuing this way of life. Ahsoka told her master that she didn't mean anything by it, but she couldn't be his Padawan anymore. Anakin tried to stop her. The hallway fell into silence, Master and Apprentice separated by a door hinge in the corridor. He told her that he would do anything to make this work. He wanted to be the best teacher he could be for her. He knew that it wasn't easy, and he knew that she would have disagreements with his line of instruction, but he was teaching her how to survive. But she understood that. She understood that he was teaching her to survive. But what good was surviving if everyone around them died? What good was being a Jedi if they were nothing but soldiers in a war that blossomed from nothingness? They both sat in silence, and Ahsoka's heart sank into her stomach. She told her master that she appreciated him. She really did. He was a good person, a talented Jedi, and a determined leader. But she couldn't stay here anymore. He tried to stop her, but she stepped away. The divide furthered each inch they slipped away from the other. Just because there was no bond between them didn't make this any easier. Ahsoka slipped back and squeezed out a very unidentifiable, "I'm sorry, Anakin." It was hidden under a rasp caught in her throat as she tried to keep tears away from her cheeks. Anakin tried reaching out, both physically and verbally, but the divide had already turned into a chasm. There was no saving it, so as Ahsoka turned around and started walking into the hangar bay, Anakin slipped out a few words, but she wouldn't be able to hear them under the subtle sobs slipping out of her. Anakin's message was the same as hers, just as simple and as heartbreaking as, "I'm sorry, Ahsoka." The Master and Apprentice duo had been ripped apart. They were no longer one. Ahsoka was no longer a part of Qui-Gon's, Dooku's, and Yoda's lineage. She stepped away from Anakin and all the men in the 501st. What hurt the most was when Ahsoka made it into the hangar bay and ran into someone else. She had already made the request to leave and she was granted. All she needed to do was get in her ship and leave. Captain Rex didn't know that she was leaving. He hadn't interacted with the general, so he was just walking around the hangar bay, doing his task and getting the troops ready into the positions for supply runs on the planet. He saw Ahsoka from across the bay walking to her ship. He thought it was weird, so he walked over. She wasn't very verbal when he got her attention, and then he knew something was wrong. Seeing Rex was possibly the worst part of this entire thing for Ahsoka. Leaving Anakin behind wasn't easy, despite the lack of bond, but seeing Rex was another story. The two of them got along really well, and they were as close as they could be to siblings. That's how Ahsoka was with all the clones. They were her brothers and she was their sister. When Ahsoka faced Rex, he asked what was wrong, and before her answer could be given, tears slipped down her face. She said that she was sorry. He put his hand on her shoulder and asked why she was sorry. Ahsoka told her that she was leaving the military, perhaps even the Jedi. The shock that passed through his body was visible in his eyes. He asked why, and she couldn't say a word. She then said that she was sorry she failed them. She was so sorry that she wouldn't be able to be there for them, but she couldn't do it anymore. She wasn't strong enough. The words almost started choking Rex up. He knew, just as every clone did, that she cared deeply about her men. Even though she had her failures, especially over Ryloth, the clones cared about her just as she did them. To lose her was like losing their family, their sister. She was comfort, peace, and gentle where other leaders couldn't be. She was what the clones had when they became one with the Force, or when they faced excruciating pain. The war was young, but it felt like they had already been with each other for a lifetime. He apologized to her, and she said it wasn't his fault. She just told him that she wished she was stronger. To walk away from them was the hardest thing she could ever do, and Rex understood. He just told her that wherever she was, whatever challenges she faced, her brothers would always be rooting for her. As the final words slipped out, she embraced him in a goodbye hug. Rex was surprised, but he put his arms around her back, and then they broke off. With a small flip of a switch, the engines turned on, and she left the Resolute, disappearing into hyperspace. Ahsoka eventually returned to Coruscant, which surprised Master Yoda, the one most responsible for giving Ahsoka to Anakin. He was well aware that something was going on, but he was unsure of what it was. There was a general's debriefing over Ryloth with Mace, Obi-Wan, and Anakin. The two Jedi generals noticed that Ahsoka was missing, and then when they asked Anakin, he snapped back saying that nothing happened. Obi-Wan knew Anakin, and he was shutting himself off, but Mace just kind of let it go. He was the one who informed Yoda about the entire situation, just so he would be aware if something ended up happening. After the debriefing, Kenobi went to go and find Skywalker and talk with him. The conversation would be surprising as it was devastating. Obi-Wan would comfort Anakin as best as he could, but both Jedi were surprised by Ahsoka's decisions. Kenobi didn't know what it felt like, but he did everything within his power to make sure Anakin knew he was there for him. Yoda inversely spent time with Ahsoka to make sure she knew that it would be alright. In his time, he had seen a couple students not bond with their instructors, and it wasn't a huge deal. It would just need to be handled correctly. So he would assist her with making sure everything was done correctly, and she recovered from the ordeal and received a new instructor. Though that would be difficult. Many Jedi were warriors, so someone like Plo Koon or Aayla Secura wouldn't be a good fit for her. Yoda wanted to make sure every Jedi thrived in every aspect of their lives, so he informed a very broken Ahsoka that they'd find a way to make this work for her. She was very appreciative of his acceptance, being that she feared Master Yoda would get mad at her during her entire trip through hyperspace, which did not help hold back tears. It was one of the hardest moments in Ahsoka's life. She was struggling unlike ever before, her emotions were out of alignment, and it was clear that she wished things had gone differently. But deep down she knew that she couldn't continue hurting herself the way she was. She couldn't be on the front lines, and Yoda would now have to do everything within his power to make sure she didn't suffer because of this war. Luckily, someone like Master Jocasta would be a perfect fit for Ahsoka. Jocasta knew his experience as a Jedi Master. She was a former council member and the leading archivist inside the Jedi Order. Her career was littered with interests that Ahsoka might be able to find relation in. As a Jedi, it was important for someone of Ahsoka's age to be trained by an instructor. Initially, Yoda thought Plo Koon would make a good pairing, but due to his conflicts and how often his unit saw the worst of the war, specifically like they did with the Malevolence, he didn't want to throw Ahsoka right back into the action that she was actively running from. The other choice was Aayla Secura, but the same thing went for her. Jocasta knew was very accepting of this, because despite the fact that she wasn't looking for a student, she would do what she must to be a good Jedi and a Jedi Master. She would take a very fractured Ahsoka under her wing and be there for her, becoming Ahsoka's teacher and bringing her into the archives to learn. It was very difficult for Ahsoka to deal with the change from battlefront upon battlefront to bookshelves surrounded by more bookshelves, but at the very least, it calmed her nerves. Though what she hadn't considered in her adolescence was how much she would worry about the clones. She didn't consider that leaving the battlefront meant her night terrors wouldn't come to an end. She didn't realize that being away from the conflict made the conflict feel just as present as it was in the front lines. Being away from the temple, she never saw it, but now she was home. She could see the effects and feel them. The Jedi that wandered the halls of the temple, all the priests, archivists, masters, teachers, and younglings had faces of pain. The Force was out of balance unlike ever before in their lifetimes. The darkness was rising, and the Jedi all wore it. They couldn't escape it, and because the war hadn't come to an end, they were forced to endure. The contrast was difficult. When Ahsoka left the temple, people were happy. Sure, the Battle of Geonosis had happened, but people at that point believed the Council and the Senate would force the war to dissipate within a month or two. Then it became 3 or 4 months, and it continued from there. The realization that the war wouldn't end soon set in, and the Jedi faced its wrath. So escaping the cries of bloody murder and suffering may have vanished in the real world, but they stayed with her in her sleep. The stress of the war was as visible as it was when she was on the front lines. Anakin, inversely, was struggling much more than he ever thought he would. It had only been a few months since he met Ahsoka, but he wanted it to work. He didn't want to give up on her, and because things went south so fast, he didn't really know how to conceptualize it. He forfeited some of his command over to Rex for the time being, due to how much he was struggling. Anakin desperately wanted to become a good teacher, because despite the grievances he had with the Jedi way, and even the way he was taught, he wanted to be a good master. Obi-Wan was a great Jedi and an even better teacher. When Anakin became a master, he realized to what extent Obi-Wan's greatness went, so he desired to be like Obi-Wan, clearly not on a teaching style type of thing, but in greatness as an instructor. The lack of bond formed between Master and Apprentice was a setback, but he never believed they wouldn't bond. And as a Jedi, he felt that as an instructor, Ahsoka's decision was a result of his failures to lead and teach. Kenobi was reassuring of this notion, but it didn't take the pressure off of his former student. Obi-Wan told Anakin that it wasn't his fault, and sometimes a Master and Apprentice just don't bond. But Anakin was adamant that Obi-Wan couldn't possibly understand them. That may have been true, but Obi-Wan, despite eventually forming a bond with Qui-Gon, could empathize with his former student, because they almost didn't bond. Because despite not actually knowing what it felt like, he could be there and help Anakin through this. It was difficult, especially since both of them commanded separate armies. However, Obi-Wan, due to the effect of the loss Ahsoka was having on Anakin, decided that he would hand over the command of the 212th to Commander Cody. Obi-Wan had a very solid bond with Cody, and he believed that the clone commander would fare perfectly fine without a Jedi general. Cody was genuinely understanding of Obi-Wan's decision, and he supported it. On the other side of that, Cody would have more responsibilities, but he was trained for that. In his own mind, he would have rather had more control than he currently had under Obi-Wan's leadership. Without a Jedi, he would actually be able to fulfill the role he was trained to fulfill. Not that Cody had any resentment for Obi-Wan for quote-unquote taking his role. It was just Cody was ready for any challenge, especially the one provided by this turn of events. Anakin's sadness turned into rage on the battlefield. He became more irritable, and even though he knew Ahsoka was safe, he felt like a failure, something he didn't want to feel like. With so much darkness radiating from his former student, Obi-Wan felt even more responsible to step in. Perhaps he was in the wrong for letting Anakin become a knight at the age of 19. Very few had ever done so, and at least from Obi-Wan's memory, the last Jedi to do that was Mace Windu. The Council and the Jedi were not very trusting of Anakin, but they believed he'd be like Windu. They wanted him to succeed, which is why Yoda was comfortable giving Anakin a student. They envisioned a path similar to that of the Master of the Order. The youngest Master to ever have a seat on the High Council, Mace Windu became a knight around Anakin's age, trained a student, and then ascended to the High Council shortly after, all of which done before the age of 26. The belief is that Skywalker would do the same, but that wasn't the case, and Obi-Wan was very quickly realizing the damage control he needed to do. Obi-Wan quickly became a guiding hand for his former student, and he was very efficient at helping Anakin. It wasn't the easiest thing in the galaxy, but they made it work. Especially since Obi-Wan was a Jedi Master, he became General of the 501st, and the Jedi Knight became a Commander. Obi-Wan did talk with Anakin about it, and they agreed upon that decision. More or less, Obi-Wan shifted more weight onto his shoulders to help Anakin release some of his own tension. Kenobi's direct involvement was very important, but it didn't get rid of the pain Anakin was consistently in for failing as a teacher. A few months after Ahsoka left Anakin to become Jacasta's new student, the 501st was brought back to Coruscant for resupplying and getting assigned a larger fleet to helm. Anakin and Obi-Wan went to the Jedi Temple. As they returned, they spoke about Anakin potentially getting another student, which was certainly a choice he considered, but in a fit of fear and sadness he rejected the idea of taking on another student, in fear of failing again. Obi-Wan and Anakin went into a youngling hall when a class was being selected by their newest instructors. Many knew about Anakin not being Ahsoka's teacher anymore, and they were all eager to become his student. After all, the younglings adored him. At the tip of his tongue, he had a name. It was a young girl in the group, about Ahsoka's age. A little younger, but he withheld it. He felt that having another student would be a disservice to the young mind and eager heart. He would leave the hall with Obi-Wan and feel even more regret about the situation that unfolded between him and Ahsoka. Anakin never ran into Ahsoka when he was on Coruscant, but he heard from other Jedi that she was doing extremely well, and she was happier, which is all he wanted for her. The last few months with Ahsoka went very differently than Anakin's. She was removed from combat, but the scars from the war were still etched across her mind. The first few interactions with Master Jocasta were semi-awkward. Ahsoka was interacting with a Jedi that did not select her for the second time, and it made her feel unwanted, as well as terrible for forcing herself out of Anakin's mentorship. But slowly, she and Jocasta built up a relation to each other. There wasn't really any bond here either. It did make Ahsoka believe that she wasn't cut out to be a Jedi. She thought that perhaps she was losing herself, and if she kept falling down this path, perhaps she'd be forced from the Jedi Order. But she stayed with the program. The distinct difference of being inside the Jedi Temple was being able to talk with masters all the time, even if those masters weren't the one you were studying under. Ahsoka didn't need to go to them, but just having the option helped her feel better. Despite Jocasta being much more orthodox than both Anakin and Ahsoka, she was the perfect balance for Ahsoka. It was difficult for Master Jocasta. She was an elder Jedi and she was the Jedi Archivist, so she had to reserve a lot of energy so that she could train Ahsoka. The reality being that Ahsoka was one of her class's special students. She may have not been the youngest of her group selected, but she was certainly special. She was very talented, and Master Jocasta, as an experienced teacher, knew how to break the attitude from Ahsoka and meld her into a better Jedi. This didn't result in tension between the two of them, as Ahsoka very quickly figured out what their dynamic would be as she had a new teacher. Because she worked closely with Jocasta, she was frequently inside the archives, and even got to go inside the restricted section. Ahsoka wasn't bonding with Jocasta, but she was excelling, though the first few weeks after leaving Anakin's side were the roughest she ever had. Ahsoka did quietly keep in contact with Rex, but it was very infrequent. When Anakin came to Coruscant, she heard he was in the temple but never got a chance to see him. It was still hard for her. She felt insatiable guilt over her actions. It was a weird feeling, too. She was both terribly upset but thriving due to her choice after Ryloth. For the following months into years, both Ahsoka and Anakin would grow in their own respective ways. Anakin learned to come to terms with Ahsoka's departure, and found reassurance through Obi-Wan's teachings. But what helped Anakin the most was his ability to find peace within himself. The peace he found came from the lessons his former master gifted him. Kenobi did everything he could to help Anakin and take pressure off of him, but he also gave him the tools for helping himself without tearing himself apart. Anakin needed to understand that Ahsoka's actions weren't a reaction to his teaching style, rather how she handled the war effort. It took time, But once it became clear to him, he was able to forgive himself for something he should have never blamed himself for to begin with. Though the question still loomed, would Skywalker take on another Padawan? He felt the call more than ever, but he did not know. Anakin wanted to be a Jedi Master, but there were only two ways to achieve that. One method was through excellence as a Jedi, and the other was through teaching a Padawan the knighthood. Anakin considered finding a means of excellence, but he knew that'd be especially difficult with the war going on. Though something that became apparent was a change in Anakin's relationships outside the war due to Ahsoka's departure. The bond with Palpatine was strained to say the least. Palpatine misunderstood what Anakin was saying about Ahsoka's departure, and he suggested that it was the fault of the Jedi, but Anakin denied that. He had his issues with the Jedi, but that was a silly thing to blame them for, because it was Ahsoka deciding to do something for herself. To add to that strain, due to Obi-Wan and Anakin being so close for the 2 years of the Clone Wars, they were able to balance out their relationship. There was a strain before the Battle of Geonosis, but because Anakin was a knight, Obi-Wan wasn't instructing him consistently, which allowed the dynamic to become a little more even, despite Obi-Wan being general and Anakin being commander. His relationship with other Jedi was pretty much the same, and the dynamic with Padme wasn't all that much different either, though it was obvious to Padme how broken up over the situation Anakin was, and she was supportive of him. She was a key factor in him learning to stop blaming himself for things out of his control. The key lesson he continued to understand and learn from this entire debacle surrounding Ahsoka and his lack of bond is that sometimes things just don't go the way you want them to go. An individual can then make a decision to accept that things don't always go our way and move forward as a better person for it. Or they can blame themselves and try and make the entire situation about how they could make it better, or this, that, and the other. But the reality is, there was no need for that here. Anakin learned to let go, and allow the nature of the Force to play out. Similarly to how he had to let his mother go, he did the same with Ahsoka. She obviously wasn't dead, and that made it easier, but this time Anakin wouldn't go on a rampage. He would learn to be more calm and collected about everything. Ahsoka's relationships, on the other hand, flourished. She made more friends on the inside of the temple, and in a strike at the temple made by a bounty hunter, Ahsoka and Master Jocasta were able to apprehend Cad Bane, and then send him to prison inside the maximum security location across the city. It was in that moment when they saved a holocron from not just the bounty hunter, but the Sith together, when they then realized the extent of their bond, and then it was formed. Ahsoka continued to grow as a Jedi and an individual, with Jocasta knew, and she was continuously proud of her own work. Ahsoka was really a generational talent. She would have excelled with any instructor, but with such an experienced Jedi Master instructing her, it helped Ahsoka become the best version of herself. Instead of simply lying inside the temple, she became active on the political front, assisting senators as they tried to make a peace treaty with the Separatists. Ahsoka was able to see the CIS government as people instead of aggressors, aside from Dooku. She began to really understand this war, and with someone as knowledgeable as Jocasta instructing her, she had a potential to have a career very similar in style to that of Mace Windu. Ahsoka and Anakin were able to develop in their own ways until they crossed paths in the middle of the war after the Jedi Temple was bombed. They would lead an investigation on the culprit together, which would be very effective as an investigation, one that didn't involve either of them being blamed, and both of them finding Barriss Offee as the criminal behind the bombing. It was during this mission that Skywalker found appreciation in what happened between the two of them in the beginning of the war. Obviously, it was awkward working together, and it wasn't easy for the first couple of hours, but Ahsoka, thanks to Jocasta's teachings, was able to ease the tension with some lighthearted conversation. For Ahsoka, she realized it's what Anakin was doing on Ryloth, and for Anakin, it was realizing that Ahsoka was thriving, and even if that meant she was thriving due to not being his student, he could be okay with it. The whole ordeal was very inspiring to him, and it uplifted his spirits. He was already doing better than he was after Ahsoka returned to the temple, but this just sent him over the moon. He was inspired to actively begin searching for a student. At the age of 22, it felt more reasonable to have a student at this point. On another note, Anakin wasn't ever lied to by the Council regarding the death of Obi-Wan, specifically because Obi-Wan decided he couldn't leave Skywalker in the dark for this entire ordeal. It wouldn't be right knowing how close they were to each other. A month before the Battle of Coruscant, Anakin decided that he would take on another student, and so he did. There was a young Twi'lek student about 12 years old, and her name was Daisha Numa. She was at the top of her class, but she was very soft-spoken and quiet. She wasn't nearly a generational talent like Ahsoka was, but she was talented. She just had a much quieter and peaceful aura around her. Anakin and Daisha would have an easier time bonding and getting into the bonding process. Skywalker was stationed on Coruscant for a good part of the end of the war. He eventually would take Daisha off-world to contribute in some battles, all of which being landslide victories for the Republic. Before the war came crashing down at Coruscant, Daisha would have her first command and excel, due to her master's training. He now understood how to do this. Kenobi was still a part of the 501st, so Daisha had the distinct honor of having both Obi-Wan and Anakin around her 24/7 for the first month of being a Jedi Padawan. She wouldn't be able to accompany Anakin on the Invisible Hand for obvious reasons, but she led as a commander on the front lines of a space battle, which was very taxing for her. With Dooku dead and the revelation that Padme was pregnant, Anakin was on edge about everything. Daisha was a great help to his unease. But of course, she didn't know about Padme. Anakin was able to keep himself distracted when he was inside the temple by training Daisha. On the day that Anakin learned of Palpatine being the Sith Lord, he returned to the temple. Sidious this time wasn't going to play these games. He gave Anakin one chance to join him. If he was going to choose the Order and his Padawan over him, then he would pay the ultimate price. This was also due to the strain on the relationship due to Ahsoka leaving Anakin. Before Anakin could return to the temple, Order 66 was issued out across the galaxy. The timing of the order was greatly offsetting the effectiveness of the plan in certain areas. Yoda was killed by a turbo tank. Kit Fisto survived by using General Grievous as a meat shield on Utapau. Aayla Secura wasn't near her troopers when the order came in, and so she could escape. Plo Koon was killed inside of a Venator instead of crashing into a building. Ki-Adi-Mundi survived on Megiddo, and on Coruscant, chaos unfolded. With Sindralik, Mace Windu, Shakti, Coleman Gaj, Agan Kolar, and Saesee Tiin present inside the Jedi Temple, it would be secured. The first wave of clones were dealt with, and that very clearly meant sedated. Mace didn't want to kill the clones. Anakin was surprised by this, but he along with the other Jedi realized that this was Sidious's doing. He obviously assumed that the clones could kill the council members. So, the council mobilized their forces to defend the temple, which included a fight between Shakti and the future Grand Inquisitor, a fight that the non-aggressive Shakti would win, not by killing him either. It was clear the order was under attack and something needed to be done. So, in a cunning maneuver by Windu, he would put Sindralik in charge of the temple, taking Shakti, Coleman Kaj, Saesee Tiin, Agan Kolar, and a much more trustworthy Anakin Skywalker with him to confront Palpatine. In a duel that would reshape the galaxy, the Jedi would fight valiantly. It was already clear that Sidious was Palpatine, and he was the Sith Lord, so they went straight for the kill. There was no need to allow any more suffering in the galaxy. The Jedi would move in for the kill. Sidious was very talented, but with 6 Jedi attacking him, he needed both of his lightsabers. Unlike his duel with Savage and Maul, where he was able to enjoy himself, he'd be very focused on fighting off and killing every opponent until he killed them all. As their engagement began, Coleman was distracted by approaching clones, so he sedated them, before being cut down the middle of his spine and split into halves by Sidious. He counted in his head. His lightsabers were ferocious. His dedication to the lightsaber was a disservice to himself, but it was useful in destroying the Jedi. Shakti was thrown from the fight when one of her Laku was cut off and a lightsaber was driven into her shoulder. Agan Kolar, one of the premier duelists in the Order, thrusted his blade forward and cut through one of Sidious's blades before being killed in combat. Anakin thrusted forward, moving with Mace Windu by his side. Due to 3 more years with Obi-Wan, Anakin became much more outstanding as a Jedi, in the eyes of the Council at least. This benefited both Jedi as they pushed Sidious back together. He was an incredible duelist. He threw Saesee Tiin backwards and watched Anakin and Mace cut through him. It was an effort led by Mace, who used Shatterpoint to break through Sidious's defenses, and then Anakin finished it up, the same way he did with Dooku, in a decapitation. At the Jedi Temple, the clones were able to break through, but Jedi Knight Ahsoka Tano, due to her excellence with Jocasta Nu, was able to assist Sindralik and the temple guards in defending the temple. It was hard for Ahsoka. She ran away from the war only for it to end up on her doorstep, though with so many Jedi prepared for the attack, they were able to rally together and stop it. Thanks to the recordings inside of Palpatine's office, the Jedi were able to present evidence after the entire debacle with the clones blew over. The casualties inside the temple were only mere dozens, but the loss of life was already too high for a war that clearly never should have happened. Due to the revelation that Palpatine was behind the war effort, the CIS would broker a peace treaty, but demand that the Republic that supported the leadership of Palpatine pay up for their actions. Inversely, the CIS needed to pay the Republic for supporting Dooku, who supported Palpatine. It was a very hostile environment, but thanks to a new generation of Jedi rising to assist the galaxy, there was a chance for genuine peace. The CIS and Republic were reminded that they weren't enemies. They were forced to be because of one man and his accomplices. Ahsoka was a leading part in this, helping out with the Jedi's movement into the future. While the Republic was in a recovery phase, Bo-Katan would try and get the Republic to invade Mandalore, and with the Clone War pretty much over, the siege of Mandalore involving Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Daisha would bring not just an end to a galactic-scale conflict, but the Sith. The victory would be remembered as a final stand for the Sith, and their last resort before falling out into obscurity. Ahsoka and Anakin would have some time to interact with each other again. Each time they interacted, they became closer associated to being friends. Ahsoka continued to thrive as a Jedi, and thanks to her master, she was able to find peace in the conflict, but also contribute to its end and its resolution. Ahsoka wouldn't take on a student until she was 20 years old, which would be closer to the end of the peace process for the Republic and CIS. There was a period where both systems of governments reintegrated into each other, and this was during that time. Anakin and Daisha were able to bond and have a happy master and apprentice bond with each other. It would be Anakin's bond with Daisha and the Council, of which he was now technically a master on, that kept him inside the Order after his children were born. Plus, despite what Padme suggested in regarding to moving back to Naboo, both of them were meant to live here on Coruscant. It was, in a way, easier to live on Coruscant than Naboo, so it ended up working for both of them. While the breaking between Ahsoka and Anakin in the early years of the relationship naturally seemed like a failure to understand each other, it led to both of them learning to understand themselves. It was also through this understanding of themselves that they were able to rekindle the dynamic and become friends. Being friends would never compare to the bond that Daisha and Anakin had, and Ahsoka and Jocasta had, but it didn't need to. All that mattered is that both Ahsoka and Anakin were content in their own lives. It didn't mean the other was worse or better because of the situation. It just meant they were able to find themselves as a result of such a traumatic beginning to their dynamic. Ahsoka would be one of the few individuals that Anakin felt comfortable enough showing Luke and Leia to, but outside of that, they never stayed as close as Daisha and Skywalker did. With the Sith gone, the galaxy could move forward, reeling from the devastating war, with eyes set on a future of peace and freedom for all. And that, my friends, is our story, and special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Arlinger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet, Gamer Lord Cali, Galaxy 66, Madman Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Portal 60 Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, Man 3 First Names, Darksaint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. 2 more days until the Season 2 finale for the Sith Clone Wars. Go check that out. Patreon, there are updates on there. Even a poll if you want Season 3. There will be a poll on the community tab on Sunday for that. Otherwise, let's spot the story. So I thought this would be an interesting story to tell. Having Anakin and Ahsoka just never click felt interesting, and it felt really tragic, but in a way I feel like it could work really well. In the Mortis arc, we see Ahsoka having this vision of her future self saying, get away from Anakin, and I guess that's where the basis of this is, but it's not getting away from Anakin, it's getting away from the war. I don't think she disliked Anakin. I don't really think there's a scenario where she would dislike Anakin. I think the disliking would come from their interest in the war versus their lack of interest in the war. And so I wanted the story to be kind of like a precursor to what Anakin struggles with in Revenge of the Sith, where he doesn't know how to handle something out of his control. And so he has 3 full years to really handle something that was out of his control and come to terms with it in a way he didn't with his mother's death. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.